Hi, I'm Ray, and I'm the owner of Rose Sign Language Interpreting Company here in Colorado. What I need to discuss with you today is a really common question. I'm probably asked once a week, do I really need to hire a sign language interpreter? I love that people trust me enough to answer that honestly. It would be so easy to just say, yes, let me send 10 of my best. In all honesty, the answer usually is yes, but I need to explain that. First of all, let me tell you, I'm not a lawyer. I work in the field of interpretation, so I really understand how the ADA applies to the provision of sign language interpreting services. If you have in-depth legal questions, those are best left to your company's or organization's legal counsel. So, that said, let's work on this kind of like a timeline. So, a deaf person has approached you and said, hey, I like that thing that you do. I would like to take part in that thing that you do or sell. Can you call an interpreter for me so I have one for my next appointment? The deaf person is asking you this because that person understands they have a federal right to communication access. The ADA that I mentioned earlier, the Americans with Disabilities Act of 1990, prevents discrimination of people with disabilities or exclusion of people with disabilities from goods or services that are available to the general public. So basically, if you're providing a good or a service, you need to provide it to everyone, including deaf people. So you then start Googling madly, looking for translators, sign language interpreters, signers, ASL, helpers, deaf services. You do your best to find somebody who can help you provide this service. So a lot of people find Rose Interpreting. I get a lot of these calls, and by the way, I'm happy to take these calls. I'm always happy to chat and explain. People will call and ask, okay, so this is what we're doing, and I had a deaf person ask if I could provide an interpreter, or they actually told me I have to. Is that right? And I say yes. I find out a little bit about their situation, and the answer 99.99999% of the time is yes. You do need to provide an interpreter. There are a few limitations on that do relinquish your responsibility, but those are very limited. Those are a really good question for your legal counsel, not for me. They're very specific and very limited. So you've called me, you've started asking some good questions and explaining your situation. So the next question that comes often is, so how do I sign up for like the grant that pays for interpreting services? And I say, oh, no, there's no grant. This is part of your cost of doing business. This is your responsibility as a business owner to provide services. Some people are confused by this, so they try another tact and they say, well, doesn't their insurance pay for that? The implication there is that the deaf people's insurance policy would pay for interpreting services. No, that's not a thing. And honestly, it would kind of make deaf people uninsurable because they do need interpreters on a regular basis. The fact is that this is your responsibility to pay for the interpreter. This is part of your cost of doing business. When you've designed your office space, you made sure that it's physically accessible, and maybe you even had to do some remodeling to make sure that people in wheelchairs could get through your hallways of your office where you're working, or into the bathrooms. That your deaf or that your employees who have physical handicaps or disabilities can maneuver throughout your office safely and efficiently. The same thing applies here. Whether a deaf person is applying for a job, wants to come to your class, your seminar, your service, or wants to buy your product but needs to discuss it with you first, you need to provide an interpreter. The cost is on your shoulders. So this may be your first time and it may be a little bit of a rude awakening, but tuck this in the back of your mind. Use this to help you next year in your budget. This is the same as assuming you're going to have some snow days. You are going to use printer paper. You are going to probably break some equipment that you need to replace. Same thing. This is just the cost of doing business. There's one misunderstanding that I've covered in some other videos, but I can't discuss it enough. A lot of people assume that deaf people will come with their own interpreter. That's not the case. If they've asked you to provide an interpreter, it's because they have a right to use a professional, trained, and qualified interpreter, not a family friend, not their mom, not their wife. For a deaf person to have to rely on another person who's related to them or perhaps a friend isn't really reasonable. It would be pretty hard to hold down a job for you if you had to bring your neighbor to help you communicate. It would be almost impossible for you to maintain that job, and how is your neighbor making money and being able to take care of themselves? So this is kind of the thrust of the ADA law, is removing barriers like communication, like physical barriers, to allow people with disabilities access and the opportunity to live full and independent lives. So expecting a deaf person or asking a deaf person to bring their own interpreter is inappropriate. And also, an untrained, unprofessional interpreter is not going to protect you as a business owner or nonprofit director or a brownie troop leader, whatever it is, if that interpreter is unacceptable or inappropriate or unskilled. If something goes wrong, hiring that person or working with that person does not protect you. So think about using a professional interpreter as a little bit of an insurance policy. You are working with kind of a proven material. So that's just another perspective on it. So I've been a little negative up until this point, but the good news is that you have so many resources available if you do need an interpreter, which you do. If a deaf person has asked you to hire one, yes, you do. Whether it's for a job interview, a job training, a brownie troop meeting, a swim lesson, a yoga lesson, a conference, a seminar, large business, small business, profit, non-profit, it doesn't matter. You need to provide an interpreter. So the good news, I told you there was good news. There are so many interpreters here ready to work. This is what we do day in, day out. This is our entire career. For some of us, it's a calling. Do you get the idea that we're really passionate about this? Call freelancers, call agencies, call the lovely and friendly Rose Sign Language Interpreting Company here in Denver, Colorado. It's 720-232-8370. You can find us online at www.rosesignlanguage.com. And also, it never hurts to educate yourself, as I said before. You can read the actual language of the ADA at www.ada.gov. So if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them. If I can't, I'm going to refer you to a legal professional. But I hope that this has cleared up some of the more common misconceptions and misunderstandings regarding a company's or organization's responsibility to provide an interpreter. So thank you so much, and I'll see you later.